As I sat at my sister-in-law Nina's sophisticated dining table in Nashville, where we gathered for our regular family brunch, my husband James, with a peculiar smile that didn't touch his eyes, asked, "Don't you want to try the coffee I made especially for you, honey?" I'm Christina, 29, and never thought I'd question if my own husband was trying to poison me. Over 3 years of marriage, I'd faced numerous incidents of accidental food poisoning. A metallic smell emanating from the coffee in front of me turned my stomach. Grinning. James wore a strangely innocent look similar to the one Nina often had after orchestrating events that left me sick or humiliated. "How considerate of you," I replied, forcing a smile while my mind raced. The aroma reminded me of when I ended up in urgent care last month after drinking tea at Nina's house. The doctors couldn't pinpoint my symptoms, yet Nina insisted she made the tea as usual. At the table across from me, Nina watched intently, stirring her own coffee, which remained untouched. "James has become quite the barista lately," she smirked, practicing different brewing techniques just for you. Her emphasis on "for you" gave me chills. James had been spending increased time at Nina's house recently.
Sitting le surprise anniversary plan.
However, something felt off. The whispers cut off as I entered rooms, the mysterious texts I glimpsed on his phone, and now this bizarre-smelling coffee. I lifted the cup, pretending to sip, scanning their expressions. James and Nina's quick glance confirmed my suspicions. Excusing myself for a work call, I stood abruptly, requesting to use Nina's study. As I moved past her setting, I intentionally stumbled, swapping our coffee cups as I steadied myself amidst the confusion. "I'm so sorry," I apologized, masking my true intent. Nina dismissed my apology with a tight smile. Through the study doorway, I observed Nina lift the switched coffee cup to her lips, battling an urge to intervene. But I needed clarity. Too many nights in ER, too many painful hours that followed shared meals with them. Initially, when meeting James at a Nashville wedding 3 years ago, he was compelling and attentive, while Nina appeared welcoming, involving me in family events and wedding planning. Retrospectively, I ignored red flags, such as her frequent accidental spills on my dresses or extra seasoning she added to my food. The incident started small with upset stomachs or mild allergies, with James readily offering excuses. "Maybe you ate something earlier," or "you might be coming down with something." A pattern emerged, worsening 2 months ago when I was hospitalized after breakfast at their home. Doctors found unidentified traces of something in my system, but James managed to convince everyone I might have consumed expired medication. Gripping the doorframe, I watched as Nina sipped the coffee. James texted unconcernedly, my untouched cup remaining cold on the table. The metallic aroma lingered unsettlingly, shivers coursing through me. Nina's hand trembled as she placed the cup down, her face paling. "James," she uttered shakily, "something's wrong." James glanced up, his face shifting from confusion to terror, recognizing the mix-up. Leaping up, he knocked over his chair. Startlingly realizing the cup switch, Na's hands trembled uncontrollably as she struggled to stand, gripping the table's edge. "James, what did you put in that coffee?" she demanded. I exited the study, phone in hand, capturing everything on video. Standing close to Na, James was pale, whispering, "That wasn't meant for you." Yet his words pierced the silence of the dining room. Nina's eyes widened with horror and realization. "Call an ambulance," she gasped. As she slid to the floor, I dialed 911, calm amid the turmoil, while Na convulsed on the ground. James, kneeling nearby, was aghast, realizing their scheme had disastrously misfired. "Emergency services, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive," I stated, maintaining my recording as Na convulsed, conscious but shaken. Nina's fearful eyes met mine, her usual cold calculation replaced by raw terror. "Christina," she groaned, "you switched, you knew?" The dispatcher confirmed help was en route, instructing me to stay on the line. James grew ever frenetic. "Nah, what's going on? It wasn't supposed to. I mean, it wasn't meant for you." "Shut up." "James," Na hissed through clenched teeth, her anger briefly eclipsing her agony. "This is all your fault. You said it would just make her too sick to attend the board meeting next week. You promised it couldn't be traced back." My heart chilled. The board meeting was crucial, with my proposal for a major client at stake, the same account Na had coveted at her firm. "The tea last month," I said steadily. "And the breakfast incident 2 months ago, they weren't accidents, were they?" Nina winced, pain doubling her over. "The tea was supposed to keep you home during the Johnson contract presentation, but you went anyway," she admitted shakily. "James said we just needed to discredit you. Convince clients you were unreliable." Sirens blared outside. James retreated, stunned as his plot unraveled. "Nah, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying," he pleaded. "I know exactly." Na spat, her words slurred. "We've been planning ever since Christina started outdoing me with every client. You were supposed to ensure she drank it today." Paramedics rushed in. I stepped aside, halting my recording, promptly emailing the video to myself and my lawyer. Watching James, frozen and defeated, told the paramedics firmly, "I'll ride to the hospital with her." Standing at Nashville General Hospital's ER, clutching my phone, I replayed the damning confession. Nina's panic, her trembling voice, evidence enough to cast away any doubts of paranoia. "Family of Na Anderson?" the nurse called, while I noted James hadn't returned after mentioning parking the car 20 minutes earlier. "I'm her sister-in-law," I said, trailing the nurse into the treatment area. "How is she?" "Stable," the nurse responded gravely, "but there are alarming toxins in her system." Dr. Phillips, gray-haired with piercing eyes, awaited my briefing as I approached Nina's room. "Mrs. Bennett, could you explain what transpired before?" Pulling out my phone, I took a deep breath as my sister-in-law became ill. "You need to hear this first," I said, playing a recording from brunch. The doctor's expression shifted from concern to alarm as she listened. "This is very serious," she noted, jotting on her tablet. "The substance found isn't something that ends up in coffee by accident. We're dealing with deliberate contamination." Just then, James appeared at the hallway's end, pale and sweating, having evidently overheard the doctor. "Christina," he began, stepping toward me. "Let me explain." "Stay back," warned Dr. Phillips, pressing the nurse's call button and summoning security to room 412. James raised his hands, surrendering. "This is a misunderstanding," he claimed. Na was confused. She didn't know what she was saying. I showed him the texts I'd found on his phone last week, which I'd secretly forwarded to myself. "So, these messages between you and Na about ensuring she's out of commission before the Henderson presentation were just friendly chatter."
His color drained.
"You went through my phone?" he accused. "After I found the strange substance in your desk drawer." "Yes," I replied. Turning to Dr. Phillips, I added, "Doctor, I've been hospitalized multiple times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. Do they match what's in Nina's system today?" The doctor narrowed her eyes. "We need tests to verify," she said. "Security will keep your husband available for questioning." 2 guards appeared, flanking James, whose facade crumbled. "Nina and I," he stammered, "we're just trying to slow you down. You were working too hard, taking on big clients. Na suggested we could make you rest." "By poisoning me?" I asked, my voice remaining steady despite my shaking hands. "How long has this been happening? Did you also tamper with my food at the Christmas party?" James's silence confirmed it. Behind him, I glimpsed Nina's room, where, connected to monitors, her bravado vanished, replaced by fear, knowing their schemes had unraveled. "Detective Mendoza is en route," Dr. Phillips said quietly. "She'll take statements from all involved." I nodded, feeling strangely calm as the truth surfaced. Detective Mendoza soon arrived, commanding attention in the sterile corridor. A seasoned investigator in domestic abuse cases, she listened intently to the brunch recording and reviewed the text messages. "Mrs. Bennett," she asked, "you mentioned previous hospitalizations. Could you elaborate?" I opened a documented log on my phone, detailing incidents. February, after dinner at Nina's, I suffered stomach pains and dizziness. April was the tea event, then June after breakfast with them. My voice steady, I described each symptom and event. Since noticing the pattern, have you kept records? She inquired, eyeing my detailed logs of dates and symptoms. Hesitating, I retrieved another phone from my purse, explaining, I carry this as a backup, recording conversations around them. I played recordings where Na and James discussed their plans. Careful not to be explicit. One captured Nina's clear voice. The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We mustn't let her spoil everything. I've got something stronger, James replied, his response implicating. She won't make it to the presentation. Detective Mendoza's gaze hardened as she listened, spotting Nina now awake through the room's window. Noticeably less confident than before. Toxicology screens are being run by the hospital, the detective informed me, with Dr. Phillips having already identified several unusual substances. We'll need samples from your home as well. Suddenly, a commotion down the hall caught our attention. James was arguing with the security guards, his desperation growing louder. I need to speak with my wife, he shouted. Christina, please, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. Detective Mendoza stepped in between us. Mr. Bennett, you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditation. James's hollow laugh echoed through the corridor. We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking on all the major accounts. Na said if we could just make her take some time off by poisoning her. Detective Mendoza's voice was sharp. That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder. As the color drained from James's face, he stammered. Murder? No, that's not. We never meant to. Then what exactly did you intend to do? I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. When you put something in my coffee this morning, what was supposed to happen? James's silence spoke volumes. Behind him, I could see Na watching through her hospital room window, a mask of fear and calculation on her face. I wondered if she was trying to figure out how to spin this situation, how to explain away months of systematic poisoning as a misguided attempt to help me. We'll need both of their phones, Detective Mendoza instructed the security guards, and I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we get the toxicology results. Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room with a tablet in hand, her expression grim as she reviewed the test results. Detective Mendoza and I followed while James remained outside with the guards. Na attempted to sit up straighter in her hospital bed, but the tremors hadn't completely subsided. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances, Dr. Phillips announced clinically. Most concerning is the presence of a particular compound typically used in pharmaceutical testing, not something the public should have access to. Na's face paled. That's impossible. James insisted. It was just something to cause mild symptoms. Mild symptoms. Detective Mendoza interrupted, taking out her notebook. Like the ones your sister-in-law experienced over the past 6 months? The door opened and another detective entered, holding an evidence bag. We found these in Mr. Bennett's office desk at the Anderson marketing firm, he reported, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels and detailed notes about dosages and reactions. I felt my knees weaken as the full scope of their plan hit me. You were documenting everything like some kind of experiment. It wasn't like that, Na protested, but her voice wavered. We just needed to track what worked. The first few attempts weren't effective enough. You kept showing up to meetings anyway, so you increased the dosages. Detective Mendoza examined the bottles. Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations? The room fell silent. James, still visible through the window, sank into a hallway chair, his head in his hands. The Henderson account, I said slowly, as pieces clicked into place. It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? You needed me out of the way permanently because the client specifically requested me as their lead. Na's face contorted with anger and fear. You were ruining everything. I built that client portfolio for years, and then you show up, and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead. James said he could fix it by killing me. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. We weren't trying to, Na started, but Dr. Phillips cut her off. The concentration in the coffee you drank today, the doctor stated, looking directly at Nina, was significantly higher than previous samples we've analyzed from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. Had she consumed it, the outcome could have been severe, possibly fatal. Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. We'll need a full warrant for both their homes and offices and to contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. Find out how they obtained these substances. Na slumped back against her bed. Pillows muffled the sound of her voice. The fight slowly, leaving her expression. It wasn't supposed to go this far, she whispered. James kept insisting we just needed one more attempt. I moved closer to her bed, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Every time I fell ill, every meeting I missed, and every client I lost, you were both there, observing and taking notes on how your poison was impacting me. What does that say about the kind of people you are? The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, I could hear the officers reciting James's rights as more arrived. Na stared down at her hands, avoiding my gaze. Detective, I addressed. Turning away from my sister-in-law, I am ready to make my formal statement now. The trial spanned 3 weeks, yet it felt like an eternity. Each day, I sat in the courtroom as the prosecution meticulously presented their case against James and Na. The evidence was staggering. The bottles from James's office, their detailed notes of each poisoning attempt, the recordings and text messages concerning their plans. What struck me most was their demeanor throughout. Na, usually so poised and self-assured, appeared diminished in her defendant's chair, while James couldn't meet my eyes. Focusing instead on the floor as expert witnesses described the potentially lethal effects of the substances they had used. Dr. Phillips offered particularly damning testimony, presenting a comprehensive analysis of how they had gradually increased dosages, clearly intending to cause serious harm. A representative from the pharmaceutical company testified that James had stolen the compounds via a college friend working in their research department. The prosecutor highlighted the defendant's calculated behavior in her closing statement, arguing it was more than corporate sabotage, but a systematic attempt to harm me, Mrs. Bennett, with a clear escalation that could have been fatal. When the verdict was finally pronounced, there was no joy, only relief. James and Na were found guilty on multiple counts, including attempted murder and conspiracy. The judge's words reverberated through the silent courtroom. The premeditated nature of these acts against a family member over an extended period demands the maximum sentence. As they were led away in handcuffs, I reflected on how greed and jealousy had transformed two people I once trusted beyond recognition. Their business, their reputations, their freedom, all sacrificed in an attempt to destroy me. A year after the trial, I stood at the podium at the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, about to give the keynote speech. The irony was not lost on me. This was precisely the kind of opportunity Na had wanted to prevent. The Henderson account, which she and James were so desperate to steal, had led to several more major clients, establishing me as a leading marketing executive in the region. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I began, scanning the audience. It's about integrity and building genuine relationships based on trust. I paused to let the words resonate. Sometimes the greatest threats to our success come from those closest to us. But overcoming those challenges makes us stronger. After my speech, several young professionals approached me for advice. One woman, her eyes bright with determination, asked how I kept my composure through the ordeal. I focused on what I could control, I replied. I gathered evidence, trusted my instincts, and refused to let fear stop me from pursuing my goals. That evening, I received an email from the Henderson client confirming the renewal of their contract for another 3 years. I smiled, contemplating how differently things might have turned out had I not trusted my instincts during that brunch. The local paper had a small article that morning about Na and James beginning their prison sentences. I didn't read it. Instead, I concentrated on my proposal for a new client project, knowing that the best form of revenge wasn't getting even, but moving forward and succeeding despite those who tried to hold you back.